Probably was angry, but he's not an expressive person. He's just a steady personality.
So if the thermostat goes up from 68 to 69, then we all get to say he's angry. Yeah. I talked on this program last week about whether all the Sunday shows, and indeed all television programs, should do more fact-checking of what guests say when politicians come and sit in those seats and make claims, some of which don't always bear that much relation to reality. I want to play some sound. Senator Jim DeMint, the Republican from South Carolina, went on a CBS Early Show, MSNBC's Morning Joe, and he talked to Gloria Borger here on State of the Union, making a charge about President Obama and the effort against terrorism. Let me play that, and you're going to see this from Rachel Maddow's MSNBC program and how she took it on a factual basis.
A lot of us have been concerned over the last year that the president did seem to downplay the threat of terror. He doesn't use the word anymore.
Senator DeMint, how has he downplayed the risk of terror?
Well, it begins with not even being willing to use the word.
Terror and extremism that threatens the world's stability. Extremists sowing terror in pockets of the world. Suffering and civil wars that breed instability and terror. New acts of terror.
When Jim DeMint says that Barack Obama never uses the word terror, he's lying. It should probably be pointed out when that happens.
Now, Rachel Maddow is a liberal, and she's going after a Republican senator, but does television need to do more of that if somebody says President never used the word terror, and you can play the clips and show that, in fact, he did?
The way he pronounced it, maybe he was saying terra, T-A-R-A. Yeah, sure, but I think in a live interview, it's difficult sometimes for people to, obviously, if you're interviewing someone live, you don't have the video ready, able to prove it. That may be television's job later. Maybe it's our job in the print business to go back and say, look, they said this, it wasn't true.
Well,
that's what you do all the time.
The St. Petersburg Times has a PolitiFact page where they have a truth-o-meter. The Washington Post during the campaign handed out Pinocchios for false statements. But I agree. I mean, I've been in a situation where people have made charges in an interview, and I don't have the facts to challenge them at that moment. I'm talking about coming back later and doing that. Now, another person who said something he probably wishes he could take back is the former mayor of New York City, Rudy Giuliani. He had this to say on Friday on ABC's Good Morning America.
One of the right things he did was treat this as a war on terror. We had no domestic attacks under Bush. We've had one under Obama.
Now, there was, of course, the matter of 9/11. Now, the former mayor apologized for that misstatement, actually in an interview with Wolf Blitzer here on CNN. And Stephanopoulos blogged his apology saying, I should have pressed him on the misstatement. It was my mistake, my responsibility. That's one that everyone jumped on. But where do you come down on this question of fact-checking?
I think the media is largely self-correcting, but I like the idea of having maybe a producer go through and, go through the transcript and make sure everything was on the up and up, and maybe posting something, as Jay Rosen suggested, if it wasn't. That said, I have seen... Jay
Rosen's an NYU journalism professor
exactly,
who's put forth this idea.
Yeah. But I have seen some fact checks that I do not think are checking facts. Number one example stands out in my mind was the Associated Press did a fact check of Sarah Palin's book, and one of the things was saying that in the book she writes, I am driven by principle rather than ambition. And so they said she was wrong because the book proves she's ambitious. That's not a fact check in my mind. So I'm very worried that the fact checks become partisan and don't rely on black and white facts.
And speaking of partisan fact checks, Margaret Carlson, when Rudy made that misstatement, and it's not just 9/11. I mean, there was the shoe bomber and there were the anthrax attacks, which also happened under the Bush administration. MSNBC was all over it. And on Friday, when I watched some of the Fox opinion shows, O'Reilly, Hannity, no mention whatsoever. It seems like each side goes after the party or the ideology that they don't like.
Well, there's an alternate reality depending what you're watching. Who's against fact-checking? It's like motherhood and apple pie. However, in the moment, cable relies on people just spouting off. Senator DeMint is known for that. He gets an awful lot of airtime. Giuliani, not so much anymore. He's much more measured. We know what he meant. He meant since 9/11. He was still wrong because of Richard Reed and some other things. But Republicans tend not to count 9/11 against Bush. That's like not on his watch because, we didn't know about that before. So
but why, okay, so cable and even live networking, because you live in the moment. But how about the next day, the day after that? Why not do it online? Anybody opposed to that?
No,
of course
if
not.
you have the resources to do it. I mean, there will be people who have the producers who are willing to do it and hire extra staff. But again, I mean, there's a number of blogs on each side of the political aisle who go through these shows line by line that can influence the coverage.
And I'm saying, why leave it entirely to the blogs? Why don't television producers and correspondents do it themselves? Amanda Carpenter, Margaret Carlson, Ann Kornblut, thanks very much for stopping by. Coming up on Reliable Sources, we'll talk about Jay Leno, Conan O'Brien, and that.